Yeah, number two, referring to, I said there were two extreme advantages that children have over professional serious adults. The first one we've talked about ad nauseum, the accumulated knowledge base, the internal maps, which constitute filters, which prevent us from assimilation at high speed of new patterning. And the second one is what? What do children have that we don't have, or rather, what pattern do we have you don't find in children which constitutes an impediment to learning? Yes, sir?
Nominalizations.
There's one. Which nominalization specifically? Okay, the insistence on imposing language on experience. I would say that's number three. I'm looking for number two. This is important. Yes, yes, ma'am. Inhibitions. In what form do inhibitions, which are impediments to learning, take in adults, which you don't see in children? Anyone? Yes? Fear of? Fear of failure. Or even, I think more generally, fear of making fools of ourselves. We don't like, as adults, normally, we don't like making mistakes publicly. Think about your experience in learning a second or third or fourth or whatever language. If you're good at it, there are many strategies. My personal strategy is to make as many mistakes as possible in the presence of native speakers. And as soon as I see the wince or a confusion, I go, what? In the language. And they tell me, and they give me the right form. And for the next 3 or 4 sentences, somehow, I will weave that right form into my sentences, which is my way of consolidating it. And when they offer me feedback in the language, I stay inside the language, I don't come out to another language to get the feedback. When they offer me feedback, corrections in the language, my response is so positive, they will continue to offer it. If you're offered a correction as you're working on acquiring a new language, and when the correction is offered, you go, oh, I'm so sorry, they will never offer you another correction. On the other hand, if you go, great, again, tell me again, blah, 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 and it's a very positive experience for you and for them, they will offer you corrections until you don't want to hear them anymore. So, children provoke the world to correct them. Children intuitively recognize that making mistakes is the single most important part of the learning process. And they have no self-consciousness about it. Mistakes for a child are not mistakes. They're an essential part of the learning process. If you can achieve that kind of posture in language learning or any other skill set, you will accelerate your ability to assimilate the pattern. So those are the two chief ones, and I like the one that you added, namely the, the insistence, in many cases, of using language and consciousness to impose structure on experience. Experience doesn't have any meaning. There's absolutely zero inherent meaning in experience. And we spend an enormous amount of our time and energy imposing descriptions and then interpretations and finally evaluations on our experience. It's just experience. You do with it what you wish. You can decide for yourself. There is no inherent meaning in experience. It's just experience. Any questions that you thought of during the break you want to present to me? Because yes, please.
Which order did you model
I'm sorry, the first part of the question?
which order did you model?
Pearls, Satir, Erickson. A question I can answer in 3 words. That's wonderful.
So you go to Erickson and you kind of absorb this stuff and then go and try out these patterns. When you were trying them out, would you just be Erickson?
Yeah.
And see what came out?
Initially, all we did, we did it exactly the way. Imitation is imitation. Now, obviously, he was 78, 79 at the time we met him. I was the hell was this? I was in my mid to 30s. Bandler was in his mid to late 20s. So there were physiological differences. He didn't have any teeth, for example, and we did. And da, da, da. So there were some things we didn't replicate. But insofar as implicitly, intuitively, we focused on the patterning in the context of application that we wanted, not the other house, just the one he was a professional. We attempted to replicate to our very best ability everything he did in a purely imitative form. Understanding nothing, no attempt to understand anything, storing it in our neurology by using micro-muscle movement and the repetition of any verbalizations in our own voice internally, maintaining the intonation contour, the rhythm, the speed, etc. So we relived, sort of shadowing what he did, micro-muscle movement and internal representations, repeating, no attempt to understand. So yeah, that is exactly what we did. Please.
There's a historical fact which is possibly Fritz died in 70.
Yeah.
How did you observe him?
Never had access to him directly. Let me go back to the puzzle. How is it possible that Pucelik and Bandler were better at being Pearls than Pearls himself? I got Pearls direct. They had direct access. I never had access to Pearls.
No, they had direct access.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So they met him
At
before he died.
Esalen, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So they actually had direct, and they also, Richard in particular, spent a lot of time looking at those films of him working, films which included both Pearls and the client in the same frame. I mention this because you immediately think, oh, great, I can go get films of Bertrand Russell and see how well I can find the genius of Bertrand Russell in his thinking patterns by watching him on film. And actually, that might work pretty well. The problem with not having live access to the model is that if you're modeling someone and it's an essentially interactive model you're working on, as was Erickson, you've got to have at least a 3-camera setup. One camera on Erickson with a time signature, one camera on the client, time signature, and one camera getting both of them in the same frame. Because there are 3 things that every pattern, if I propose I'm giving you a pattern, you should demand of me 3 things. 1, a description of the pattern, its elements at the sensory descriptive level, so you know what the hell I'm talking about. What are the elements of the pattern, and what sequence do they occur in? Number 2, what benefits, what consequences will ensue if in fact I congruently follow the pattern and apply it? What am I going to get? Now, the ball in the cat indicates I cannot, as in the case of the shattering the glass, I can't tell you where the fracture lines will be, but I will shatter the glass. So there's a control over the specificity with which I understand what consequences I will get if I congruently apply the pattern. That's the second element. The third element is the problem we had. We had a stack when we were, for example, modeling Pearls. We had a pile, unorganized pile of patterns. It wasn't hard to find the patterns in Pearl's work, or Satir's, or, as a matter of fact, Erickson's. Some of them. Some of them were quite subtle. What was really hard was to answer the following question. And this is the third element that you demand that I give you when I give you a pattern. And that is, under what circumstances, under what conditions specifically, do I pick pattern A as opposed to pattern B? This is a very difficult question. I would say that less than 10% of the patterns that I recognize as being NLP patterns, both classic and new code, have an explicit answer to that question. Most of them we don't get. I mean, with disciplined, rigorous trial and error research, we can come to an understanding of that. But at the moment, this is the least developed part. That's why I mentioned, at the moment, given the state of development or undevelopment in NLP, having an unordered set of patterns which order themselves only with respect to the responses they evoke is a far more ethical strategy in approaching change work as an agent of change than having some model or theory.